your humble host tonight because we have gathered in this beautiful location at Eden Beach to talk about some interesting findings that this dynamic panel has put together for us. I am so humbled to have such a full house. Bonochi,
Boa noite.
welcome, welcome, welcome. And everybody that's watching us via live streaming, via the Facebook page of Terramar, Bombini, welcome. Tonight we have a few house rules. Let me just jump into that before anything else. As you know, we will be live streaming via the Facebook page of Terramar. And we have a full house here. So we will have the two guest speakers speak first. I want to ask everybody to turn the phones on silent. Now, everybody, make sure, turn the phones off. Paga telephone off po deriba silent. If I hear any beepity 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 beepity, I'm gonna send Ariane on you to yank your ear. So please, for the sake of everything going smoothly, make sure that the phones are turned off or on silent. And without further ado, I have a brief introduction. Tonight you're here to talk about DNA. And DNA is so in and so hip nowadays. Everybody wants to sign up, spit in those little vials and find out if they are how many percentage this and how many percentage that, and have very interesting discussions about heritage, identity, and origins. And it's our privilege now to engage in research and conversation like this because, as they said, ancient DNA laboratory at the Harvard Medical School, led by Dr. David Reich, studies these genomes of people who have lived in the past. And through the lens of genetics, they can provide new insight on humanity. And they've done so also with what they call pre-Columbian people. So this is not this era, but pre-colonial and beyond, to be precisely between 1,000 and the 1400s. Right, Mr. J?
Mhm.
I paid attention. So the people, our islands have been inhabited for many, many, many centuries. So it's very interesting to see that in 2020, the Reich Lab, together with archaeologists, anthropologists, and museum curators from all over the world, carried out this large-scale study of ancient indigenous people of the Caribbean. So through this genetic evidence, they can show and determine the indigenous ancestry of these pre-Columbian people. And that's what you're going to hear more about tonight. Now, you're not going to hear me talk about it. We have an amazing, amazing panel that are going to dive into the research because they found 14 graves near Amboana, to be precisely. And I remember hearing the commotion and the excitement when these settlements were found. And to see Mr. Jay Havaser and some kids even, and volunteers helping, but also the professionals, of course, the archaeologists digging. And today, finally, they can present what they found and what they are going to do with these archaeological findings. And we have a few people that we want to thank that made this possible, of course. First of all, this research was done by on ancient Bonarian DNA, thanks to the Bonarian Archaeological Institute. And they have been doing archaeological research for the past 20 years. So Mr. J has been digging for a long time. And so we want to thank you and congratulate you for your contribution to the Bonarian heritage.
Well, Bunai is more than just me. Bunai is the whole team, yeah.
You and your team.
Yes.
You and your team. And so these human remains come from the Amboana rescue excavation. As I told you, the 14 individuals that were unearthed. And Mr. J. Havaser oversaw the excavation, and it was completed along with Arcol and funded by the OSEWE and the OLB. So we have to give her a hand of applause. Thank you. Thank you. And of course, we want to thank SCAL also for their contribution to this, to safeguard the Bonairean heritage, which it's very important. And we want to thank Terramar, Fuhikubo, Bonai, and they're all working on the development of an exhibition, which will be called Bonaire and Its People. So everybody's working together, where these results will be published and made available and visible to everybody. So you can come and see and learn more. Yes. And the presentation came together as a result of the collaboration and the financial support of RNO. But without further ado, I want to introduce our panel a little better. Mr. J. Havisser. He received his doctorate in archaeology from Leiden University in 1987. I was born, I was in diapers running around. But, and I lived in Leiden too, so we have a kindred Leiden link there. He has a very extensive resume that I won't bore you with. He will explain yourself everything that he's done, but he's a knight. That's a good thing, from Queen Beatrice in 2008. And he's now retired, but he still cannot resist a good digging, right? You can't resist it, but he's retired, and he is guiding 3 science programs, the CMARC
on St. Martin Archaeological Center.
Bonai and
Sebark on Seba, the Seba Archaeological Center.
Yes, thank you for the proper pronunciation. So we have a treasure of archaeological investments in our region, and we're very grateful for your dedication, Mr. J. Havisser.
Thank you.
And next, I have Miss Kendra Sirac, like the wine. And Dr. Kendra is a senior staff scientist and ancient DNA laboratory at the laboratory of Dr. David Wright at Harvard University. And she researches and analyzes the genomic information of people who lived hundreds and thousands of years. I don't know if everybody paid attention in biology about genomes and cells and DNA and all that good stuff, but she's an expert in sequencing these and finding out more as much as we can about them, right? And so her research helped us understand how groups of people move around the world and mix with each other, and how we relate to them nowadays. And Dr. Chirac co-authored and published a publication that reported on the largest amount of ancient DNA data from the Caribbean peoples prior to the European colonization. Because life did not start at colonization for us, but before that. So without further ado, I will give them an opportunity. They have both prepared an interesting presentation for you. So I hope you pay attention, take notes, because after they are done, we're gonna ask the burning questions. Not before, not during, after, and then we're gonna have a spirited Q&A with them, and you're more than welcome to engage in that. We'll have a break that you can get something at the bar in the meantime, and come right back and join the conversation. So without further ado, Mr. J.
Thank you,
Un
Deja.
applauso.
I am much more natural standing up, waving my arms around. I just can't speak without moving my body. So I'm going to stand up here and talk to you. Thank you, Deja, and thank you to Terramar. Thank you to Bonai. Thank you to all who have helped. What I want to do is just give you a little bit of background tonight about what we did with this particular project and how we've reached this whole next level of research, which then Dr. Sirac will talk about. So I want to talk about, and let's see how this is going to work. Yep. Okay, that's just the title. See some excavations there. Oh, Did that go too far? Okay, so let's give a little background. We all know Bonaire. We got some dimensions, population size, and environment for Bonaire. But the site we're going to talk about is in Amboina, and the site we have identified in 1976. There was a skeleton that appeared in the grounds near the school. At that time, Aina, headed by Eddie Ayubi in Curacao, handled archaeological studies and archaeological investigations. He contacted Dr. Jauke Takema. Dr. Takema was from the Utrecht University, and he brought over a man named Hans Kemperman, and the two of them excavated that skeleton. Now, I just recently learned that one of the young people who saw that first skeleton was Felix Nicolas. He was also there at the moment when they were first finding it. Here is a photograph of Eddie Ayubi, myself, with Dr. Takema, looking at the skeletal material there. What we're talking about with this site is a village, not just a small village. We opened up a section of the village and have already found extensive remains. I'm going to go into more detail on that. But let me continue first, give you the background of how we got to where we did the big excavations. 1976, we know there's a site there. From that information in 1987, when I did a whole island-wide survey for pre-Columbian sites, I did test pits there and got some first radiocarbon dates. And at that point, we knew we had deep layers of artifacts and that we had early dates. My first dates that I got in 87 were around 700 to 800 years ago, right? Then in 2015, as the project was of SKB came with the idea to expand the school. First, I should say, in between, there was the Monuments Council who made a designation of the site as a registered monument. Very important point, because once it was a registered monument, when SKB came along, and after 10-10-10, something called the Malta Convention applied. The Malta Convention means if you are going to develop lands that have recognized archaeological significance, you must do archaeological investigation. And as the developer, you must pay for that archaeological investigation. In this case, it was SKB, which fell under Osewe, and that's how the project was initiated. They knew they had to do archaeology. In 2015, NAM came over and did some small test pits and started to identify over the area. NAM is an organization on Curacao, if you didn't know, for archaeology. And they came over and identified where some hot spots were of materials in the ground. From a 1910 Warbata map, we look at the area. Does this thing have a pointer on it? No, I don't think it does. In this lower map, you can see there's an open area with a very small square in the middle of it, a yellow square. It was like a goat pen, an animal pen. And it may well be that there is a correlation between that little piece and the hot spot. Because what may have happened is the ground didn't get as disturbed. It got disturbed to a certain level with the animals and then not deeper. So the site material stayed intact in that enclosed area, whereas it may have been more developed or altered with agriculture outside of that area. Let's go to the next slide. And again, I'm just giving you a little background here. We know the group was the Caicatillo ethnic group from northwestern Venezuela. So in the dynamics, and all along I'm going to be showing you some of the types of objects we found here. These are ground shell pendants and little ornaments that we found, many of these. There are three key points I want us to walk away with understanding tonight. Those three points, how am I doing here? Indigenous peoples lived on this island for thousands of years. European and African descendant peoples have lived on this island for hundreds of years. The very fact that the indigenous people have been here so long, millennia, not just centuries, that in itself recognizes that they deserve respect. And they deserve a proper investigation and place in the history and identity of Bonaireans. So that's an important premise. A second premise is that the artifacts, customs, and burials are deep cultural expressions. These are things that have continued since prehistoric times. So we do see certain manifestations of indigenous culture, traditions, behaviors, diet. We still see it till today. And that, again, reinforces the indigenous part of Bonairean identity. And thirdly, considering technological advances and limited economic potentials that we do have, we have to accept the fact that we will need to continue to do international cooperation. We can't actually handle a very large scale, very sophisticated, very high-level professional excavations. So there are cases where we have to have international cooperation. This case is a very good test case of the fact that even when we have international cooperation for archaeological research, there still must be someone or some entity that is supervising for Bonaire in these projects. Great to have international cooperation. We recognize we need it, but we also have to have a voice in what's going on. In this particular case, the OLB and RNO in the case, I'm going to show you some pictures of that in a minute, they decided we need to do the archaeology. We want to do high-level professionalism. The Monument Council of the time made the decision we want to go with a professional archaeological team. However, we want to assign, in this case, myself, to represent Bonaire in a supervisory capacity in the project. So somebody was there with eyes on the project every day, all the time, making sure that our values, norms, and interests were being defended in this project. Next slide. Now, one of the things that I have noticed through all these years is all the time we talk about the professionals and the ones that are in front of the camera and doing the press releases and all that. But you know the real silent heroes, the real people who are behind the scenes? These are the Amtenars. These are the civil servants. These are the people who actually have to make sure that the payments get made and the permits get set and everything gets taken care of. And I wanted a slide just dedicated to the people who were part of this project. They deserve the same respect that we do, because they're doing their job to make sure these types of projects are happening. For example, that we had the Monuments Council, and this is between 2017 and 2019. This is as we're developing the project. The excavations were conducted in 2019. So there was the OLB through RNO. You can see it's different persons now, of course, but these are the persons who were there at the time. Also, Osewe, the RCN, again the OLB, and in fact, just recently, Dr. Mercure has assisted us because we had to have the permit letters to export this material in order for it to go to the laboratories, and so he has assisted with that. So it's a simple slide, but it's an important one because we have to show respect to everyone who really did make this thing happen. And it's not just the archaeologists, it's also the Amtenars. Next. Oh. All right, now we get to see some of the materials, and now we're going to get to see some of the reason why this excavation and this report that has been produced. I have it somewhere. You can have a look at it. We have found a lot of just artifacts and beautiful materials But more than that, we have found really hard evidence about life ways completely. In this case, you can see that the Arcole group, this is the Dutch team that came in at the top there. That's the loader operator. He was a really great guy because the Dutch use a technique in archaeology. This is contract archaeology. They don't use shovels all the time. What they do is they do test pits. They establish at which level has the level that you're looking for information, and then they use a loader and they shave layers off and shave. And the archaeologists follow behind the loader, and as soon as they see a soil color difference, they mark it, and that could be a grave, it could be a house, it could be any number of things. But what they're looking at is as it shaves down, then they put hand excavation at those spots where they see potential differences. So you can see, for example, here is the whole area as the loader was clearing it out. To the left, you can see one of the skeletons that has come out. A couple of the really spectacular artifacts, which I'm going to explain right now, and some more of these shell ornaments. This carnelian bead here, or amulet type of thing, very beautiful piece of carnelian. It's about that big. This other object, this is when it first came out of the ground. We have cleaned it up. It's jet black. It is bitumen-like material. It's kind of a tar coal kind of material. There have been other objects like this found in Aruba. So we know that in prehistoric times that they were using this type of material. But what's really important is these two objects were found on a skeleton's body. He was holding it on his chest. He also had beads around his ankle and beads around his arm. So this was a very significant person. What's interesting with this artifact, you see how the one piece flares out and has holes in it, and the other piece is like the little stub? In the top of the stub piece, flat, there's a hole. And in the bottom of the flare piece, there's a hole. What they did was they had a wooden staff, and they put pegs on each end of the staff, and they put these on the ends of the staff. This would have been like a very high status person's staff. And most likely the holes in it would have been where they tied feathers and things onto this. So this is a spectacular object to find. It's also very difficult to conserve because now that we've taken it out, we have to be a little bit careful with it so it doesn't dry out completely because it's the kind of material that can. Next slide. Here are some of the types of ceramics that we're getting. The type of ceramics are called dabahuroid. Go faster. Oh, well, oh gosh. Okay, so here we got the ceramic types. You can see this is a very distinctive type of ceramic which we can identify very closely to Curacao and to northwestern Venezuela. The dabahuroid ceramic style represents in general the area of the Kaykatil people. And it was the Kaykatil ethnic group that produced the dabahuroid ceramics style. And that's what these are. You can see stone tools. These are some of these shell beads and crouches. This is at a very important point. To the right here, you see the discolorations, the circles? Can you see those? Those are post holes. When you shave the ground, you can see where posts had been dug and put into the ground. You see above it the circle of the post holes? That's a house. They were living in circular post-construction houses. And that is very important because I'm going to show you in a minute, we found 7 houses. 7 houses. And we only dug up probably less than a quarter of the village. So we're talking about a very large village was here. Next, well, I keep saying that. Okay, now the skeletal material, which is going to be the object of Kendra's talk more, We had 14 skeletons. Not all of them were complete, but we had 14 skeletons that we found. What's really important, and it revealed a cultural tradition of the indigenous people, the Kaikatio people, was that all of the dead are buried in the floor of the huts. They don't have cemeteries out away from the village. No, they bury their family right under their feet. And we found this consistently in the houses, and some houses up to 2, 3 burials in the house. Now, there was one other unique physical anthropology characteristic we found. We found 2 bodies without heads, and we found 1 hut with only a head. Now, what? There are certain cultural traditions in South America where they take the skulls of ancestors and they hang them in special places as sort of a remembrance or to sakufuku or however you interpret it. It could well be that the heads had been removed to be placed in the tops of the rafters of the huts. And the one that only had a head, that's where it had come from. That's just conjecture, but it does clop, it is consistent with ethnographic analogies in South America. Okay, we had, and it's always important for community engagement because we're researching Bonaire's history, so Bonaireans should be absolutely a part of what's happening. And in this case, the Bonai organization, which is particularly focused on youth and getting youth more aware and involved in heritage studies, we had a great day that we had them out. They got to participate shoulder to shoulder with the archaeologists. Bonai itself has gone through a transformation this week. As mentioned, we have 20 years now, but also the old board, which was myself, Jackie Bernabella, and Hubert Viss, we have stepped aside so that a whole new board of Bonai can now take over. What's wonderful is the whole new board of Bonai is all former Bonai students. Remember, we started it 20 years ago. They were 15, 16 years old then. Now they're 35, 36. Now they're doctors and lawyers and business people. So now they are productive members of society. And we've got them, they're going to be carrying us a next 20 years with Bonai. Now, this one is important to show the continuity. We're continuing on with our coal, with all these different groups. These are more recent photos showing the different organizations. Arnaud, Scal in particular. Scal has been very participatory in this project because that's where we deposit the materials at this point. What I want to show you is this map right here. I'm going to wrap up. I'm almost getting there. You see the circles, you see where the house structures were, and it's a little too small, but you can see the dots where the burials were inside them. Remember, this is only the section that we had to dig up because of the school. The site extends all the way over from Escabay towards Flamingo TV. It extends across the road, behind the dam, all the way up north too. So this is a very big village. We've just uncovered just 7 of the houses. Now, this, as I mentioned, is a case for positive international cooperation. When we're doing a type of project like this, now we can extend our international cooperation to Harvard and doing the global genome research that they're doing. That's an important point. For this project, we have the first person of this particular, Dr. Sirach's part, the first person was Dr. Felicia Frica. She was the physical anthropologist who dug up the skeletons. About 6 months ago, we had a Dr. Alfredo Coppa. He's an Italian geneticist, and he came, separated from the skeletons the very, very specific small pieces that you need in order to get the DNA out of the skeleton. So we're not doing whole skeletons, we're getting pieces of skeletons and doing the DNA research. And Dr. Sirach is the next phase of this. She's going to take those samples, go to Harvard, and process them in her laboratory so that we will get that ancient DNA genomes and information. We're watching Terramar and Bonai and Skal all cooperating together for an exhibition at the end of this year. And oh, and more positive cooperation. This is more just telling you a little bit more about with Bonai and a lot of the projects we've been doing over the years. You can see so many different projects. As a matter of fact, almost everywhere you turn over the 20 years, you'll see a whale skeleton. You see something under the sea at Cha-Cha-Cha. You see the obelisk. You see Tanki Maraca. This is all Bonai work. So we have really made a contribution, and we're going to continue to make that contribution. Whoop, let me go back. Yeah, okay. There are two messages I want to bring with you to close. There are two messages I want to bring to push us into the future, where we should be going now. I have presented these already to the government of Statia. And Statia not only accepted the suggestions, they have actually made a decree to say they should be implemented. So Statia is already doing this. I want Bonaire and Saba hopefully to also do this. First, we need to create some kind of a Bonaire Heritage Center, a place where Bonai and Skal and Fukuhibo and museums and different organizations, archives, can all come together, share space, but also be a place where if someone wants to find out about heritage, they go there. When schools need to learn about heritage, they go there. It becomes a central information center for heritage of Bonaire. It should also include a government heritage authority. There should be a person for Bonaire who is the contact person about heritage matters. Right? So we can have these international cooperations, but they need to have somebody to contact with. And part of the long-term goal is that we need to produce scholarships for young Bonaireans to get degrees in heritage studies so that they can come back and run the Heritage Center. And I'm going to close with this last part. This is, for me, one of the most exciting parts. And again, Statia has accepted this concept. When development occurs, and it's going to continue to occur, archaeological mitigation, excavation of human remains is going to continue. We're not going to be able to stop that. But we must show dignity and respect as ancestral remains of those human remains. So what we have proposed is a concept. Now, I just put ancestors part. It could be called anything. The community should decide what it's called. But the concept is all archaeologically excavated human remains can be brought out of the ground. They get 1 year to conduct DNA, isotope, whatever technical studies they want, and then they get reburied. The proper ethical thing to do is rebury these remains. One of the things that happened in Statia, we found 11 skeletons on shelves at Leiden University that had been there for over 40 years, just sitting on the shelves. That's not correct. We're in a new age of archaeology now, where we have to not only show respect for communities and give communities more authority, we also have to show respect for our ancestors in this way. So the concept of the Ancestors Park Burial Ground, it solves three problems. It shows respect for the ancestral remains, it allows scientific studies and development to continue, and it solves this problem for the smaller islands of storage space. Maybe something not everybody thinks about. When we dig up this stuff, when you dig it up, you've taken responsibility for it, so you have to keep it. You have to store it. And human remains require even more conditions, climate conditions and other things than other objects. So this solves that problem. So we are hoping that into the future, these two concepts can also somehow, and I really want to speak to the front rows here about these things, because this is the way forward. Archaeology, a long history of changing social context. Well, now we're in an age where ethical principles stand for archaeology. And I don't know, it was written on one of the slides, the number one principle of the Society of American Archaeology when dealing with the human remains, the excavation of human remains is a privilege, not a right. And we've got to remember that. It's the local community voice which must also be part of the discussion. Now, phase two, the scientific studies, we are moving on to a whole new level of research now with genetics and DNA. And now I would love to turn it over to Kendra, or I'll turn it over to Deja to introduce Kendra on.
Please.
Thank you.
A hand of applause for this.
Yeah, that was a thank you slide. Yeah.
Okay, I'm up. Hi, I'm Kendra, as Deja introduced me. I am a senior staff scientist at Harvard. I study ancient DNA. So what I want to do today is talk a little bit about that. I hope you all paid attention in biology class.
Like I said.
Bringing it back to you. So what's DNA? Simply put, DNA is a really small molecule. It's found inside of almost all of our cells in the body, and it's responsible for the development and function of an organism. It's passed from generation to generation. You could think of it like a book, like a recipe book. Your human genome, it's all of your DNA together, and it's a recipe book. And that recipe book has 3.2 billion letters. All of them are A, T, C, or G. Okay. All right. If we read that recipe book of any human being on Earth, they're 99.9% genetically similar. It's what makes us all human. However, there's 0.1% differences. And that means we have one letter that's just different. And we call that a SNP. You could see that here. That's a single nucleotide polymorphism. So 1.1% of 3.2 billion accounts for 3 million differences between any two people. And that's what I study. Okay, so as humans moved out of Africa and around the world, genetic variations, or these changes in your genome sequence, so letter change, they arose and they spread. And they were passed down differently in different groups. Okay, my job as an ancient DNA researcher is to study the DNA from people who lived long ago, to understand where they came from, how they were related to each other, and how they relate to us today. I'm gonna try it over here. Yeah, if you don't, I got it here. All right, so what is ancient DNA? Ancient DNA is DNA that's extracted from an organism that lived hundreds of years ago to hundreds of thousands of years ago. Ancient DNA usually comes from biological material, bones or teeth most often. But it can also be recovered from sediments, literally from the dirt, or from cultural artifacts. So why do we want to study this anyway? Okay, I'm going to try to stand over here. All right. It's all right. We study DNA to understand people who lived at a known time and a known place in the past. This is important because humans have not descended in simple ways from people who came before us. Instead, our history is characterized by movement and mixture, two things that humans do. They move around the world, and they mix with each other along the way. So I want to give you an example here. All right, say we have time A. This is what our world looks like at time A. We're all nicely separated apart. Now, there's some barriers to reproduction. Sometimes these are cultural, sometimes they're biological, but for those reasons, we don't share the same genome sequence with every single person, and we start to separate into groups called populations. So then, at time B, the world looks a little different. And then we have more things going on. So next, populations move. Here you can see they're exchanging genes with their neighbors. They're moving short distances. Then, at time C, again, the world looks different. So if we move on from time C, people sometimes move long distances in addition to short distances. Sometimes this is by choice, voluntary migration. Sometimes this is not. An example would be the transatlantic slave trade, where people were forcibly moved to another continent. Now, all of a sudden, we have time D. And what I want you to focus on here is the Caribbean. Now, if I looked at this genetic landscape at time D, how would I ever know what it looked like at time A? And this is what we study using DNA. The genetic landscape that exists across the Caribbean right now is very different than it was hundreds of years ago, and is wildly different than it was thousands of years ago, before European colonization and the transatlantic slave trade. So, ancient DNA allows us to go back to time A. That's all it does. Simple as that. But it also allows us to go back to time B as well. So all of a sudden, I take out all of the mixing and movement that's happened in the last 100 years, and I have a direct lens right into the past. Now, ancient DNA does not stand on its own. We make the data, but we have to interpret it alongside archaeology evidence and evidence from cultural history or oral traditions. All of those aspects are ways of knowing the past, and we incorporate them all when we make our interpretations. So how do we study ancient DNA? The reason that it's important that we take these bone samples off of the island and to Harvard is because we have a specialized ancient DNA facility. Now, we work in a facility, in a clean room facility, that is designed to minimize contamination from modern DNA. So ancient DNA compared to modern DNA is very degraded. The molecules are short. So we don't want to contaminate those ancient molecules with our own living DNA. So an ancient DNA clean room is accessed only by a small number of trained researchers. They wear PPE that looks like that. It's cleaned with chemicals such as bleach and UV irradiation, and that helps us destroy DNA. And it's never used for the study of modern DNA. So it's a very special facility. Now, how do we study this? I've been asked this question a lot over the last few days. It's quite a simple process. It starts with a bone, and oftentimes we use a specific bone, as Jay mentioned, and that bone is here. It's on the side of your skull, right behind your ear. It's called the petrous part of your temporal bone. We take that bone, we make a powder from it, we mix it with a watery solution, and that releases the DNA molecules into solution. From there, we add these little adapters to the ends of the DNA molecules. They make them detectable by the sequencer, and then we sequence the DNA. And all that means is that we read the letters. We read that recipe book, all those A's, T's, C's, and G's. We have data, and then it's my job to analyze those data. So we published a study of ancient Caribbean people in 2020. I want to acknowledge everyone who participated, including the ancient individuals we studied who could not consent themselves. So we used community proxies to provide consent for them. Worked with a lot of people all throughout the Caribbean. It was a wonderful project. And we studied DNA from 263 people who lived anywhere from 400 years ago to 3,100 years ago. And here you can see the temporal and the spatial distribution of that sample. So I'll go over quickly what we found. One of the main findings was that people who lived in the Caribbean prior to the spread of ceramics, so the earliest inhabitants of the Caribbean were people who used stone tools and people who hunted or gathered their food. Later came people who used ceramics and practiced agriculture. So these groups of people were genetically very different from each other. So we have here what you call a PCA, and this is just a fancy plot that geneticists use to show genetic diversity. You can interpret this plot by saying if you are closer to an individual in this space, you're more genetically similar. If you're further apart, you're less genetically similar. That's all you need to know. So what we see here are these two groups. First, we see this red group, these red squares. And these turn out to be all of the people who used stone tools and foraged for their food, the oldest inhabitants of the Caribbean. Then we see this blue group over here. And these turn out to be all the people from across the Caribbean who used ceramics and who practiced agriculture. So what we could say is these two groups of people were very, very different. Now, we also were tried to figure out where did they come from originally. For the people who used stone tools, we didn't really get a good answer for that, to be honest with you. What we found out is that they came from somewhere within Central or South America. So the warmer colors on that map, that means closer, genetically more similar to someone in that region, and the cooler colors mean less similar. So you could see all those colors in Central South America are roughly the same. We couldn't really tell. Now, for the ceramic users, it was a different story. We found that they came from a very specific area of Northeast South America where Arawak-speaking people live today. So we were able to put the exact point of that beginning migration into the Caribbean right in this location here. Now, another exciting thing is that we found that some people had mixtures of different types of ancestry. So for example, and maybe unsurprisingly, ancient people from Curacao had ancestry from ancient Venezuela, as well as shared some with people who lived in the Lesser Antilles. They were about a 3/4 to 1/4 mixture of those two different types of ancestry. Now, we identified a new lineage passed down from mother to offspring, mitochondrial DNA. Some of you probably know what that is. And it is a new lineage. We found it in the ancient Caribbean, and it still exists in people today. We can see this in a genome from a man sequenced in Puerto Rico. So it's this red color here. And we can see this new haplogroup has perpetuated from the past and is evident today, shows direct continuity. So the indigenous ancestry in some places today is not the result of post-colonial movements, but has been there since the past, many, many thousands of years. And this is in line with a lot of people's oral history. So what's next? And why Bonaire? So why am I here? There were some big spatial and temporal gaps in our data set. So you can see here in blue, I've circled the places that we studied in our first study, but you can see there's a lot of places that we didn't get to study. In red, these are the places over the last year or so where I've collected new data from. So I've been working with people who work at different institutions, museums, universities, cultural centers on these islands, and we're filling in that data set. Now you'll notice I gave a special color for Bonaire. That's why we're here. This is what I'm doing here. It's not just a vacation. This is what I'm working on here. So why? Why would we do this? Why does it matter? Why are you participating in this? The main question that I want to get at with this research is what is the genetic makeup of the people, the first people who lived on Bonaire? Before Europeans, before Africans, when it was only indigenous people, what was that genetic landscape like? How is it similar to or different from your neighbors? Curacao, Aruba, Venezuela. What are the similarities? What are the differences? And what does that mean? And then finally, how does Bonaire fit into the genetic story of the whole pre-Columbian Caribbean? It's beginning to become clearer, and it's really exciting that Bonaire is going to be a part of this story, a very important part of the story. Now, can we use this information? And this is a long-term goal. Can we use this information to contribute to the celebration of Indigenous heritage of people who live in Bonaire today? How can we connect the past to the present? How can we celebrate this facet of ancestry that is important to many people on this island? So, with that, I am grateful to be here. Thank you for allowing me to do this work, for including me in this work. It is an honor, and I'm very happy to go on this journey and to keep you all informed and involved as we move forward with this.
Okay. Amazing, amazing. Very, very informative, right? What did you think thus far? Very good? Very interesting. Thank you. Thank you for your work, for your dedication, because I think it's very important to understand or to develop an understanding how unique yet diverse we all are. So amazing, amazing. Both of you. Thank you for very, very clear presentation. So, ladies and gentlemen, now we're gonna have a small break. You can go to the Eden Beach Bar, and if you want to get a drink or something small to eat, how long will our break be? 20 minutes. So everybody that's watching us from the live stream, we're gonna take a 20-minute break, and they can log on at the same link. I'm looking at the technical people, the same link. Okay? And we'll be right back. Nós estamos back aqui. Vai lá com come, bebe, something to eat, something to drink, a snack or something, and we'll be right back with a Q&A. Yeah? Bonochi! Welcome. Can everybody come back? Hala cerca, hala cerca. Nos sabay kumisa. Ronda bestelling. We're gonna start. Namang sing? Yeah? Público online, bombini, corda, kwe bebe, grab your drink, grab your snack, because now we're gonna have our Q&A. We're gonna ask some burning questions. Fine, no problem. I'll just keep it on the side. I'll put it behind. Right. Yeah? Okay, yeah. That's good. Okay. I'll do both because. See. Okay. Kendra and Jay, are you ready to answer these burning questions?
Ready as ever.
Good.
Yeah, okay, boom. No stay.
Okay, no stay.
Okay, Torini, Binding.
As the people are trickling in, we're gonna start with a Q&A. Mr. Boy Antoine,
What?
good?
Boom.
You have some questions? You bali pregunta? No?
Mhm.
Okay. Yes? Hold on.
Oh.
Maya, abot yung mic up. You work, came to work. Usala. Abo? Okay. Oh. Okay, we're ready. So, a few. Attention, please. Attention, please. Hindi na di bong ambiente. Gezellige bubbles. Aha. Listen up. I want you to be quiet. Really, I'm serious. I want you to be a little quiet. Aha. Thank you. Aha. Thank you very much for cooperating. I just want to remind everybody that the phones are turned off or on silent, and the lovely Maya will be the mic of assistant tonight. You're not gonna yank the mic out of Maya's hand, you hear? So raise your hand and politely wait for your turn, and I'll give you the floor, as they say. Ask one question at a time, brief and concise, and please identify the person that or the people that you want to answer your questions. Clear? And tonight we're gonna speak English, not because Dushi Papiamento is overrated, but we have people online, guests online, that don't master the Papiamento language yet. However, if you feel uncomfortable, you can ask it in Papiamento and no sa traduci pa, but we're gonna translate for you. So there is no shame in anybody's game. Okay? Cool. So without further ado, let's start. Are there any burning questions? Yes, sir. What's your name? Stand up.
Andre.
Andre? Yes?
André Naar. Is it okay if I sit?
Sure.
So, if the early humans crossed the Bering Strait, took the Kelp Highway on the west coast of United States, or went in interglacial ice times in between the ice deposits towards Middle America, and then continued, and the first humans were 16,000 years ago in northwest Venezuela. How far back can you go from descendants that you find on these islands back to people that lived in Venezuela, or even earlier?
early group, late group thing.
I think that's a question for me.
Yeah, I'm looking
So,
to.
yeah, all right. So that's a great question. The earliest archaeological evidence we have of humans living in the Caribbean is, I believe Jay and I talked about 8,000 years ago.
In the Caribbean
In the
islands,
Caribbean
but in the
islands.
mainland it's different.
In the
Older.
mainland, it's different. It's older, but not that much older. The Americas were the last place that humans moved into. So what we use are ancient human genomes from all of the Americas. Right now, the data from Venezuela are not really there to allow us to do that comparison back in time. We hope they will be there. We're working on it. Right now, we use some ancient genomes from other places in South America where we have very ancient dates. Chile, we have some from Belize, we have some from Peru, and those are our data points. So we are able to track ancestry as deep in time as we can go with DNA, but we're missing spots. We're missing northern South America. We're missing parts of Brazil. We're missing deep ancestry in Colombia. We're missing in Venezuela. We don't know what it looks like yet. That's a gap. And we're working to fill that gap. And once we do, I think we're going to open a whole new door to really directing that map that I showed you where I said we don't really know where this comes from. I think we're going to get a much clearer picture in the upcoming years with more reference samples from the continent.
If I may say a word on that too, when you think of this migration of people coming across the Bering Strait, coming down the Americas, and reaching South America very rapidly, by the way, that 14 to 16,000 year period when it was open and they were coming down, think of it not as one group moving down, but it's waves coming down. And each wave has different genetic markers in some respects. They're different populations. And so when it comes down, there are different areas that establish sort of foundations for differences. You noticed in the blue dots, there were light blues and dark blues. So there were distinctions. So it's important to not think of this human inhabitation of the Americas as sort of a single wall movement, but rather series of waves of people coming down. But they did move very fast, and you are correct. In northwest Venezuela are some of the oldest states in all of South America from radiocarbon dating. But now we want to compare that with this genetic material.
Thank you. Next question, Aryan.
Thank you. I'm Aryan. I have two short questions for both Jay and Kendra. The first one is to Jay. In the beginning of your presentation, we saw a couple of very nice-looking artifacts, right? And some human remains. Now, after they've been studied and analyzed and looked at in places that are better sort of equipped for it, what is going to happen to them? Are they going to be coming back to Bonaire? Do we have the facilities, the capacity here to show them, to present them, to do education on them, et cetera, et cetera? If not, what needs to happen, both in terms of the subsidy programs that you develop, the proposals that you develop, the cooperation from the side of the government? What do we need to ensure to make sure that what you guys find here and analyze somewhere else comes back to Bonaire and becomes available for us, for the public? That's one question. The other question is for Kendra. Partially the same question. When you do research proposals, when you develop your program and look for funding you need to do your work, to what extent do you take into account that you do your work in various places of the world that do not necessarily have the infrastructure in place where to permanently show and work with the results that you bring them? How do you, apart from government funding, obviously, but how do you, in your programming and in your program design, take into account a sort of a sustainable element where what you do remains a part of the knowledge and the spread of knowledge in the local communities where you do your work?
Well, I'll go ahead and go first since you asked me first, if you don't mind. It's a very simple answer. We put together only the pieces that needed specialized study. They were put into a sealed box. They were taken to Holland, to Leiden, where they did the analysis. About almost a year later, I went back, got that box, all of the artifacts back in the box, the analysis finished, and brought it back. All of the objects from the Amboina excavation, all skeletons, everything are here. Currently, they are being stored at Skal. We are looking also, the idea of the Heritage Center also included having suitable storage facilities for archaeological materials. But your point about making sure things come back is absolutely on mark. We need to make sure. There are some types of studies we can't do, so we have to send some things off. The DNA work, sometimes carbon dating, for example. But all of the materials must, will, and in the case of Amboina, have come back. So that's a security. What we hope, the Heritage Center concept could offer an opportunity to not only have them stored properly, but have them accessible for researchers and the public and schools.
Okay, next question. Oh, Kendra,
Me.
I'm sorry.
Me
I'm so
first.
sorry.
Okay. Again, a great question. To be clear, when we do our ancient DNA work, it requires exportation of human remains, which are an invaluable resource. They're an important part of culture history. We always give them back to the country where we study them, where they're from. We really see ourselves as temporary stewards of the material, not long-term owners. So the remains from Bonaire, anything that we do not study, will come back here. But
What you do study is destroyed, though. As a
right.
analysis, part of it gets destroyed. The rest gets in back.
But what you asked about, how do we instill kind of more capacity, more resources into the institutions that we work, is a great question. It's something I'm grappling with myself. It is different in every context. Every place around the world has different needs, different requests. Sometimes it's for storage, boxes, something as simple as that. Sometimes it's educational programs for students. So what I try to do, it's probably imperfect, but it's a case-by-case approach where I talk with people, I see what they, as an institution, would like to gain from our research, and I figure out how to make that possible. And that's something that you should be demanding from your foreign researchers, is that the research that they do benefits local institutions, local students, local groups, that they are giving back to you as well. I'm conscious of that, but I look to you all to tell me what that looks like here and how this work can be beneficial to Bonaire students, to Bonaire's community, to Bonaire's institutions, and how we can appropriately celebrate and kind of share the work we're doing.
Thank you.
Could I add a little bit? One of the productions, this is the archaeological report of the Amboina site produced by the archaeological team Arcol. It's an extremely professional report, but even more than that, all of this information now is accessible. We can get it to you digitally. So you don't even have to buy this. We can distribute it digitally. The point is, this is hard data. It's not just good stories.
Wait.
Wait.
Do you want a mic?
We have a question here in the back first.
Oh.
You see, she's stricter than I am. Give me a second.
Yeah, okay.
Yes.
Hi,
Your name, please.
Yeah. Can you guys hear me all right?
Yes.
Perfect. My name is Julia. First, I want to thank both Dr. Sirach and Dr. Havaser for being here tonight. This is very exciting information, and I'm very excited to see what research comes out of this to help us understand our heritage a little bit more. My question is specifically for Dr. Havaser over the village, specifically the burials that you found within those huts. What made you draw the conclusion that those were remains buried within a house versus huts that are designed for burial?
Well, that's a good question of a sort, but we have so many cases of these house structures. Aruba has different sites that they've excavated like this. They have many of these houses. In Venezuela, they've identified these house structures. So it has to do with the patterning of the post, but your point about the intention of the building, whether it was intentional for burial or not, if it was a house for burial, and this is just conjecture here, it would seem logical that all of the burials would be in that house. But what we find is one burial in this house, two in that house, two in that house, one in that house. So that isn't consistent with the houses being only for burial. If you're talking about the village and these are the houses, if you had a burial house, then you'd find more burials in them, would be the logic. But also the ethnographic information that they were burying in the floor of the house. This is a known information from South America.
One cool thing that we will get to do with the DNA is that we can actually tell whether two individuals are genetic relatives of each other. So in the past, I can identify family members. Sometimes we can identify very large families, like 50, 60 people who are all related, either lineally, grandparents, parents, children, grandchildren, or aunts and uncles, cousins, etc. So a great question would be to look where there's multiple burials in one house setting and see if those are relatives. Because to me, that implies that this is a family home, and they're keeping their deceased close to them. And even if it's distant relatives who had died at different times, finding that they were related to each other would be really, really important and would kind of support this idea.
Okay, thank you. Yes. We have another question. Say your name, please.
Hello, thank you, Ini. Thank you. You have to stand up.
If you want to.
I would like to ask you.
What's your name, please? Your name.
Ini.
Amy. Okay, hi, Amy.
Hi. Okay. Would you be able to reconstruct the appearance of people like they did in England with the first Britain?
Good question. The answer to that is yes and no. And that's for several reasons. We have some qualities of our physical appearance that are controlled by our genetics. And we know that. Scientists have been studying that. They're well mapped. But the environment also plays a huge role in the manifestation of our genetics. So we call that gene by environment interaction. So you might have a genetic predisposition to be a certain height, but without nutrition, without proper care, you don't reach that height. So this is a very complex thing. In simple terms, what we can do is we can use panels of certain places in our genomes to look at things like hair color, eye color, skin color, and we can make a guess of what that would be. And normally, you see these beautiful reconstructions, and it looks like they came to one answer. In reality, what the scientists came to is a slightly statistically significant signal that said this person is more likely to have darker toned skin than lighter toned skin. So make of that what you will. The artists will freely interpret that into a single drawing. But the reality of it is complex. It's not perfect yet. But it's something that we can do. In some cases, it makes sense to do it. In other cases, it doesn't matter. But yes, it's a great use of genetics, and it's something that really special. If you do your own DNA, you can see what your genes say about you, and you can see whether you have those traits or not. For example, my 23andMe says I do not have dimples, and I have dimples.
Interesting. Thank you. Another question, please? Please state your name and the person you want to answer your question.
Hi, good evening. My name is Alfred Philip. I would like to ask you a question, Jay. What is the difference between the ancient DNA, or maybe to you, Kendra, ancient DNA of Aruba, Curacao, and Bonaire? What do they have in common?
Yeah, we don't know that yet.
No.
This is what we're going to find out. So right now, we have ancient DNA from, I want to say, 5 individuals from 2 sites on Curacao, but that's it. Now we know that those individuals from Curacao have ancestry that we trace right to ancient Venezuela, and they have some that they share with other groups of the Lesser Antilles, which to me suggests that there was a group moving across North America, and they shared migration both into the Lesser Antilles and into the ABC Islands.
But those were not the Kaikatios, or were those Arawaks?
It's very hard to associate a genetic signature with a social group without other lines of evidence. So that's a question that maybe Jay could speak more to the people who would have been here at that time. But what I can tell you is that I expect the DNA of people from Aruba, from Bonaire, and from Curacao to be quite similar, because I think we have reason to believe that people on these islands were probably connecting with each other. If it wasn't migration, it was probably some sort of movement between these islands, because we've seen that across other islands in the past.
And that's why genetics is not this field of the study alone to reconstruct heritage. It needs archaeology, it needs history, it needs oral histories. For example, with there was the discussion about the difference between the archaic, the earliest peoples, and then the agricultural peoples. That can have an effect. But through the archaeological evidence, these pottery styles, like the Dabohuroid pottery style, we use that as an indication of a common sphere. When you have the same artifact design, the same painting design occurring in this area, the deduction is that these groups are somehow connected. And we do see that, Aruba, Curacao, Bonaire, and Northwest Venezuela. So we know that archaeologically there's a connection, which we call the Cacatillo, but now the genetics is going to help us reconfirm that. It's not one discipline tells the story, it's combining the disciplines to tell the story.
Okay, I've got one more question, Kendra. How do you explain that the ancient DNA found here on Bonaire has not been changed through all those millenniums?
Well, the DNA itself can change over time, but it changes in a limited way because our genome doesn't evolve mutations very quickly. It's a very slow process, and for those mutations, those changes in our letters to become very frequent in a population, they have to maybe give some sort of advantage to our survival. So over time, without the movement of new people into a region, our genomes are relatively stable. But what we might be able to see is, for example, evidence of new people coming into a region at a certain point of time. I'm not sure that would be the case here, but in other places, we have seen the genome be stable for a while, and then a new group, maybe genetically similar, maybe not, moves in, and we see some sort of shift in the overall gene pool of the population. So I expect that there was a lot of stability across the whole time that the ceramic using people were here. That's what we saw elsewhere in the Caribbean as well. But there's always a chance that new people moving in will change the genomes, sometimes in drastic ways, sometimes in subtle ways.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. We have more questions? Hold on. Yes, Arya?
Well, just a quick one. There was really a follow-up on Jay showing the book, the research result. One of the issues that we face on Bonaire is that as soon as we want to do a deep dive into some of these things, you hit paywalls, right? Academic publishers have paywalls. It's not easy to find the information out in the in the free in a free Google search.
Right.
Now realize it's not your personal responsibility to make that happen, but what kind of pointers could you give to people living in small islands with limited resources, to very expensive Harvard databases as such, to still get the type of access to that type of novel research that normally would be virtually inaccessible because you would have to pay $100 a year.
Right.
to
Well,
get
one of the most important things about the Harvard approach to these genetic studies is that all of their generated data is put in a public format. Once the analyses are done, the results are concluded, all that data is put in a public access format. Anyone then can use that data for studies that they are doing. This does two things. One, it allows anyone who wants to access it, to see it, to be able to study it and use it. But also, and this is also very important, it minimizes the amount of bones you have to keep taking to get more samples. For if everybody has to get their own sample, then we're using up skeletons. We're using up cultural resources that shouldn't be overexploited. So that's a two-point, very important public access part of the result of the work that Dr. Sirach's
And to build on that, encourage people that are working with you or requesting to work with you to publish open access. It is expensive for us. We are the ones who should be incurring the cost. Everything I publish is open access. Any paper that comes out of my lab is freely available on our lab website. If you search Reich Lab Harvard, Kendra Sirach Harvard, probably Kendra DNA, you will find the website. Every single paper and all the supporting information is available for free there. If you do not find a paper, write to a researcher and ask them for the PDF. 100% of the time, I will send it to you. Absolutely. Even if it's not my own work, I will send it to you, I will get it to you, and that is something that we share as a community. We all do it, we all try to do it. I will also try to publish my work in resources that I know you can get. In some places that works well, publishing in the newspaper. We write something short and concise and simplified for the newspaper, and that gets out to people. Some places it's going on the news. Here, y'all love press. I've done radio, I've done TV, but I know that's how the message gets out there. So tell your researchers what you want, and if you're not getting it, ask, and hold them accountable for it.
Thank you. I have a question.
Please.
Yes. You said earlier, Jay, that you have only scratched the surface as far as the location of the settlements that you have excavated. What are the future plans to excavate the rest? And how big do you think this project would be?
Okay, for the specific Amboina site, I have to qualify it. I think I was telling somebody personally, but I did say this once earlier, but because of the Malta Convention condition, which requires the archaeological investigation, we only were doing archaeology in the area that's going to be directly impacted by the construction of the new buildings. We did not excavate beyond that because that was not within the impacted area's conditions of having us do the work. If future expansions of the school, if some of the neighboring properties do decide to develop, the fact that it is a registered monument site area, they are going to probably run into the same situation with Malta Convention requirement that they have to do archaeological testing. In that case, then we will assess the scale of it, and then how do we approach it there? Does it have to be at a larger scale, like where we did this, or can it be at a small scale? But I can tell you this, just from looking on the surface, we have identified the village site, as I said, going all the way to Flamingo TV, going all the way across the road and the dam, all the way up north. It's a very big village. This was probably one of the largest villages on the island at the time.
So there are no concrete plans to excavate that unless...
Unless they request construction further. So the area that they're going to construct has been already mitigated. I will add this, and this is a good point to add. We intentionally kept a large chunk, actually it's about 40 by 40 meters of the site. In fact, it's a prime part of the site. We left it untouched. One of those maps, it was the green area, or the red area. We left it untouched because archaeologists have technology today that we do analysis, but in 50 years from now, they're going to have new technologies. Things like the genetics are going to be enormously more advanced. So we need to leave sample for the future archaeologists to be able to also sample the materials intact. I'll add one other thing about further development. Bonai is in discussion with SGB right now in a very positive way, because we all see the importance of the fact that this school is sitting on a very important indigenous site. So we are talking about incorporating Amerindian elements, design, means into the atmosphere, the space of this new school. One idea could be reconstruction of one of these pole houses as a gathering area for students.
Okay.
Out in the courtyards area. So we have some ideas. The point is, we need to show at that site in particular, and for our young Bonairean students right now, a sense of pride and importance of what that site represents. Because I said it earlier today on the radio, but I want to repeat it again today. We have a long history of studying Europeans in these islands. The last years, we have a long history of studying Africans and continuing these studies. We need to elevate the research and representation of the indigenous elements of Bonairean culture equal, en pareo, to the other cultural groups. So we need to put an emphasis on that indigenous element in culture, and one way to do that will be at the very high school where our young people are learning. They daily see designs and elements of Amerindian culture.
Thank you very much. Are there any more questions? Yes?
Lillian.
Hi, Jay.
Yeah.
Kendra, thank you for your presentation. This might be a stupid question, but I try to understand, Jay, especially with the fantastic book that you wrote before the first Bonaireans, and we learned a lot about especially the influence that the Kaiketio had, and that Arawak is the language, all the things that you wrote about, that you did. My question was this: I think that when you wrote in that book, or maybe somewhere else I read it, that the Indians, let me call them that, came up from the Orinoco, and they separated. The group came up, they went to the left, let me put it that way, if you see South America like this,
Right.
and the other group went to the right.
That's right.
And that takes me then to Kendra.
Yeah.
When in your, I saw the map, remember which one it was, stage 4 or something like that, and there was this brown cube that you had, square that you had, because first you went through the blues and all this, and you ended up with a square on the side by Brazil at the edge, and that you said that you think that's where the origin is. Can you explain that to me again? The origin of
Absolutely.
what, and then how does it relate to the migratory effect of
Absolutely.
the Orinoco?
It's a great question. So what I was referring to on those squares on the map, Those are the genome sequences of present-day people, of present-day living groups. And the majority of that first study focused on the Greater Antilles and the Lesser Antilles. So that was the origin for the movement of ceramic-using people into those areas. And what we've seen from our few data points on Curacao is that these islands have a different population history, and theirs derives more from a Venezuela-like source than the Arawak source from Brazil that you saw in my figure. So those were old data. That was data mostly looking at Dominican Republic, Haiti, Puerto Rico, and some of the Lesser Antilles. That was Guadeloupe and St. Lucia. But Curacao, and I expect Bonaire, will be different than that. So we saw for Curacao, there was more ancestry, about 3/4, that we could trace to an ancient source in Venezuela. And I think as we start to build up our Venezuelan data set, we're doing that right now. We have a wonderful Venezuelan researcher who's working on that. And then we start to do more from Aruba and Bonaire as well. We'll just strengthen that message.
If I could also answer from some sort of a geography perspective as well too. The groups that I was describing, which we have pretty good evidence of, it's in the middle Orinoco where our people that came to the ABC Islands were coming from, not the lower Orinoco. That's what we see from the archaeology. And they're coming the Apure River, which goes left, and then down the Rio Tocoyo, the Rio Aroja. There are different rios that go from the Tocoyo. Then they go south to the coast and come out just east of Bonaire in different areas. So we're thinking that's the migratory route. Your question about connecting it to the Amazon, the headwater of the Orinoco River is touching the headwaters of the Rio Negro. And the Rio Negro becomes the headwater of the Amazon. So those two rivers have a common headwater space where it looks like, particularly for the Arawakan language, this is where the main area of coming out is.
And one important thing to remember is that these are all branching events. So it's a common source population, and people branch off at different points in time, at different places along the continent. But what we'll see genetically, and this is probably why we saw that connection to Lesser Antilles, is that somewhere deep in the lineage, they converge, they coalesce, they form one group. So we see that, because a group might have gone left and gone right, but we have to remember that they come from the same source.
That's
exactly.
You know, and just a curious little side fact, in the same book, I did an outline of the rock art, the Pintura in Jan, the rock art, and there's a very interesting phenomena that occurs. From the middle Orinoco to the headwaters, you have both rock engraving, which is carving the art into the rock, and rock painting. At the middle Orinoco, you get a split of the artwork, the rock art. The rock engraving goes on down the Orinoco and comes out into the Eastern Caribbean islands. In the Eastern Caribbean, you don't get rock painting. You get rock engraving. Yet, the Rio Apoyo and the ABC Islands, you get rock painting. So there was some sort of also cultural element in these population migration splits that were happening.
Very interesting. Thank you. Do we have any more questions in the back?
While we're waiting on a question, I just want to throw something in. A little controversial, but it needs to be said. This is a year, 160 years after abolition. This is a year where we're recognizing, we're researching, we're trying to better understand the slavery past. We should not forget that the slavery past is not an exclusively transatlantic African phenomena. The indigenous peoples were the first enslaved peoples. So we have to give them the same attention the same respect and even the same funding for research for us to identify and see that slavery as an institution is not bound to one ethnic group. It is across the board. And I think that we need to recognize that fact and highlight that fact in this year of discussion about slavery. Well, let's make sure it's very clear that the first enslaved peoples were the indigenous peoples.
Thank you, Jay. Please, in the back, state your name and your question. Thank you.
Yeah, hi, my name is Amy. I was just wondering where we can get this book and these resources. Like, is it available in Bonaire?
Right now, this is the report produced by the Arcol company for the Oseway and OLB. There were a certain number of copies printed. They were distributed here to the funders. What we do, though, have is a digital version of it. And in agreement with Arcol, because they only printed a certain number, we are able to then distribute the digital version. So we can, if you want to get a copy of this, then contact either Terramar or Bonai, and we will figure out a way that we can get you the access to the digital version of it. Yes, literature. Sigur. Well, I have one, and I don't know how many more physical ones they have, but a digital one, of course. A digital one we can get to you easily. I went to Holland to get this from their offices, and this was their last one. So they don't really have many more printed ones. Not impossible it could be reprinted. That's a rather sizable expense, but at the same time, the digital version, which has the same information, we can make available.
Thank you.
Does that answer your question, Amy?
Yes, thank you. Any last few questions, because we have to wrap it up tonight? I have one more question, if you would allow me, and this is for Kendra. I heard a lot of talk about DNA. Can the modern Bonaireans participate especially the connection between the ancient and to see maybe if there are direct descendants or not? Maybe it's a long stretch, but maybe
it's possible.
And if so, how would that work?
Yeah, that's a great question. If people are interested in doing that type of work, it is possible. It's not something that I would walk around collecting cheek swabs after this. But if that is a way that a person sees as a valuable tool for connecting with their heritage or an aspect of their heritage, I highly encourage it. We will have ancient DNA data by probably around the end of the year, maybe early next year. And that will take about another year to write up and make publicly available. Once that is available, it's available on a repository, a biorepository where all data live. It is challenging to get without computational genetics skills, but it is possible to do a genetic testing through, you can do a commercial company like 23andMe. There also could possibly be academic interest in studying groups of people from Bonaire, should they be interested. And that could be compared, in theory, with the ancient data we generated. We did this as part of our first study. I studied some ancient genomes from Puerto Rico, part of the 1,000 Genomes Project, sequenced DNA from people living across Puerto Rico today, and we were able to do a direct comparison between DNA past and present and identify lineages that spans prior to European colonialism and exist into the present day. So this idea of the extinct Taino is what somebody wrote once in a press article, able to totally dispel that notion, and that was important for a lot of people. So if you are interested in learning about this aspect of your past, a commercial company, 23andMe, would be able to give you some semblance of the data. The data they will give you is only as good as the reference data set they are using. Right now, that does not include a large amount of DNA from present-day indigenous groups in the Americas for a number of reasons, one of them being that they have been treated historically very poorly by scientific researchers. So this will be starting, and I hope it will be starting in a big way over the next years, because this is a very important part of appreciating your ancestry and hopefully someday also improving your health and the health of your children and your grandchildren. So we can talk about that maybe next time I'm here, once I have the results, and try to figure out if that would be possible to make something like that happen.
Thank you. Any final questions, people? We're good? Then I want to thank you for being such an amazing group of people tonight. Thank you for listening with such careful attention. Yes, ma'am?
That we have food and people can stay and network if they want to.
Okay.
Talk or drink or whatever.
So you can have food and stay and chat and network and right, and you can talk about DNA and all of that good stuff and archaeology. So I want to thank the people that watched us via the live stream from Terramar. Like the Facebook page of Terramar. Come on, you go ahead. And if you have any questions, you can leave them in the comment. And most probably somebody from Terramar or Mr. J or Kendra can answer those questions. So if you have any questions, feel free to leave those in the comment. And thank you. My name is Deja Mensch, and I hope to see you next time for our next News Cafe hosted by Terramar. Buon noite! Deus me